It's the new thinking in archaeology. Find some worthless debris, analyze it, understand prehistory. Kind of noble, don't you think? Why did it have to be snakes? Look at that little wheel spin.
Having recently beat Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, I started to wonder what other video games have been made out of the Indiana Jones franchise that I have never experienced, and moreover never even knew about. Turns out one of those games is Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, which I picked up a cartridge of recently and played on my good old Nintendo 64, one of my childhood consoles. Now this is a highly flawed early 3D game, and it's one of the only games I've ever played that suffers from some technical issues in how it runs that make it almost unplayable. Whether you find it unplayable or not, with the issues it has, depends largely on your tolerance for games like this that have such issues. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine suffers some graphical slowdown here and there, pretty badly, where the frame rate will be dropping to slideshow levels. But beyond that, unfortunately, this game has a habit of crashing unexpectedly, and the only way to get the game to recover is to power off the N64 and turn it back on. Resetting won't do it. The N64 doesn't like rendering this game, even with the expansion pack that it uses. I would say that as I played through this game, there were roughly 10 times or so throughout the levels where I was prevented from proceeding through the game due to it freezing completely, or due to some level glitch occurring which rendered the level incompletable. On these occasions, I had to just power off the N64 and power it back on, sometimes losing a little progress. Now, despite the technical issues of this game, which are pretty severe, I was able to complete it without a guide. I played all the way through to the end and got the credits to roll.
Must be another slightly different way.
Never needed to look up what to do on the internet. But the game's a little cryptic. Despite the flaws this game has, however, I think it's a really cool early 3D game, and it actually impressed me a lot and treated me to a lot of fun moments, such that I don't regret having bought it and played through it. I just wanted to share with people what the experience was like, if anybody's curious as I was. Like many N64 and early 3D games, this one doesn't spend a ton of time telling its story. At the start and at the end of each level, there will typically be a cutscene that lasts, I don't know, maybe a minute or two, in which Indiana Jones and potentially one or two characters might appear and or explain a little bit about what's going on in the story.
That's where mortals raised the Tower of Babel to invade heaven.
Well, you know, this does look like the ruins of Itimenanki, the ziggurat often identified with the tower.
There's a relatively small cast of characters here, so there aren't any characters that are really there as a waste. It's an efficiently told story with an efficient, small number of characters, and a functional plot exists here. The story of this game takes place in the 50s, during the Red Scare, so it's set a bit after The Last Crusade, and Nazis are no longer the enemies after Indiana Jones and out to foil his archaeological preservation efforts. This time it's Soviets. And I think the story works pretty well for what it is. It's a little cheesy, sure, but what Indiana Jones' story isn't. Additionally, I have to comment on the subject matter of the story and the plot, and just say that it's a little more fantastical and out there than most Indiana Jones stories, but I still think it functions very well. It's very interesting to learn about where the story's going, and the way things unravel as you go through the game is never boring.
Him searching for Marduk, a creature the Babylonians worshipped as a god, but he doesn't live in heaven, just on another plane.
This game came from a time when video game adaptations of films and film franchises were often pretty bold in the stories they chose to tell, and this game takes some fun liberties. Liberties like fighting the kind of monsters you may expect to only find in a Zelda game. I won't say too much to avoid spoiling it, but there are some interesting foes that you encounter other than just the occasional wild, dangerous animal or a Soviet soldier. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine is a third-person action-adventure game, very much like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is, and it borrows a lot from the way that game controls in terms of having items mapped to the C buttons and having a first-person view you can look at with the top C button and Z targeting. The game is mostly exploration and puzzle solving. I would say it's about 60 to 70% of that, and maybe only around 30% combat or encounters with enemies you have to overcome. The enemy diversity is quite impressive, and so is the environmental diversity of this game as you work your way across the 16 levels that comprise it. The game has mountains, rivers, jungles, a lot of really cool environments to explore. Plenty of very dark places like underground temples and mines. It's really neat. If I had to guess how long each level took me to beat, I would say on average around 2 to 3 hours per level. Occasionally one level would get me hung up on a puzzle that I struggled to solve, and there was one entire night where I was just playing this game for hours and couldn't solve the puzzle until the next day. So that could happen if you're a stubborn person like me who demands they beat games without a guide. I was able to find my way through the game though. This game has some really brilliant puzzles and level design in places, and 3D space is fully used in a great way. Lots of hidden rooms and ladders to access different levels of the levels. It's a lot of fun exploring the 3D environments here, and I'm super impressed with them for how early a 3D game this is. In any given level, there will typically be one main puzzle you're trying to solve to proceed forward, and oftentimes there will be little sub-puzzles that kind of serve to solve that bigger puzzle. And also, the Soviet soldiers constantly on your tail as the antagonists, or the bad guys, after Indiana in this game. They will often appear at some point as you play through a level, often in the later half of it, as you're getting closer to solving some riddle, and they'll try to come and stop you. It gives the levels a little extra excitement. Indiana Jones will find a few key items that he uses recurrently throughout this game to solve puzzles or get past environmental obstacles. He'll start the game with his lighter that is used just to light up and get a better look at dark places, and he'll also have his whip from the start of the game, which is used for swinging across a few chasms or gaps that he couldn't get across otherwise. That's really the extent of using the whip for getting through environments, although occasionally you can whip something that's high directly above you and just climb straight up, so it's occasionally used to get to higher places, as well as across gaps. The combat is pretty limited. Indiana Jones can only attack enemies with guns, basically. There's one other key item, a machete he gets, which I was able to use to attack some animals that were attacking me at a few points, but largely it's just the gun. The whip, I was able to use the whip to scare away some big ferocious animals, like a cheetah, I think, at one point, and some hyenas, but the whip doesn't seem to really damage enemies, and it's really slow as well, so if you use it to try to fight human enemies, I think they'll just shoot you to death before you can even whip them once. The guns are quite varied in an impressive way in this game, however. There are a lot of different kinds of guns. Indiana Jones has his revolver on him at all times, but you'll also find a submachine gun, an assault rifle that works better shooting enemies from afar, has a longer range, a couple other different kinds of automatic pistols, a machine pistol, a bazooka. This game has a bazooka. And yes, I did use that bazooka as much as possible. It was quite fun. You can also use other explosive weapons like grenades, satchel charges, and in addition to finding these weapons on Soviet soldiers you take out, you can also buy them at the end of each level. Between levels you'll get a chance to shop for things. Health items to recover health and heal poison that spiders or snakes inflict on Indiana. But you can also buy ammo for various guns as you discover them, so there'll be more to choose from and buy later in the game. And the money you use to buy the ammo, you get that money from finding artifacts in each level. There are up to 10 artifacts hidden throughout each level, and Indiana Jones can find those little secrets, and you get a little money reward for them. He sells them, apparently. For bullets. Archaeology. Selling artifacts for bullets. So the whole gameplay loop works pretty well and efficiently, and your exploration is rewarded with health and combat items to help you along and have an easier time through the game. While the controls of this game are not very responsive, they are varied in terms of the things you can do to get around the levels. Other than walking or running, Indiana Jones can of course jump across gaps and jump up to dangle on ledges and then pull himself up to higher places, or if he's getting to a lower place in the level, dangle and drop down to avoid taking fall damage. You do have to worry about fall damage. Also, Indiana can crawl to avoid hazards that will otherwise hit him and kill him, or just to get into a narrow little tunnel that doesn't have a lot of headroom. And he can swim. To describe the swimming controls, I will say swimming on the surface of the water, Indiana Jones is not very fast, but when he dives under the surface, suddenly he becomes like a dolphin. He just swims incredibly fast. Just keep tapping A and you will outswim any piranha or shark that is on his tail. They will just be left in his bubbles. Now, the platforming of this game can be challenging, and it might weed out some players who are unable to deal with a clunky controlling N64 game pretty early on. It took me to the end of the game until I really got the feel of it, and what I can say is this. The controls in Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine are functional, and they are precise, but the window for how precise you have to be is pretty small. So what that means is you've got to line up your jumps really carefully, you've got to move through environments deliberately, and you have to understand how Indiana Jones responds to your use of the N64 controller. Now, the game is clunky in that he doesn't turn on a dime very fast. He kind of moves around like a geriatric grandpa. If I can borrow a term coined by another reviewer, that's pretty accurate. And just pretty slow moving, and as for the jumping, he can jump laterally across things, And the game does respond to how much you tilt the N64 analog stick with those jumps. Tilt it just a tiny bit, he'll jump just a short distance. Tilt it very far, and he will jump a lot further. And you have to get good as the player at controlling your analog stick movement on the N64 controller, and that's that hard task. The N64 controller analog stick is very bad, but you have to do that if you want success moving through the environments in this game. It's a challenge, but it is doable. A lot of jumps in this game are very close jumps. Like Indiana Jones will jump across a gap and just be hanging from a ledge, and then he'll be able to pull himself up and move on, but you've got to try a lot of different things in this game to move forward, both in terms of just exploration and trying to jump places that it takes a lot of boldness and courage, frankly, sometimes to attempt. And also, you have to try a lot of things in the puzzles.
I need to line myself up here.
You just have to have the resourcefulness as you play through this game to pull out a lot of different items and try using them in a lot of different ways.
I might be able to whip that thing. Well, that ought to do it.
Even though I think most of the puzzles are pretty well done, well made, well crafted, and logical, a handful of them are pretty cryptic and not as logical. You just have to be patient with those few kind of bad puzzles to get to the better ones, and by the time I beat the game, my impression on the puzzles was strong. Adding to the gameplay variety of Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine are a couple levels in which you get to control vehicles. And much like Indiana Jones himself, these vehicles control kind of in a clunky way, but they still added variety and fun to the game. One of them is a Jeep that you'll get access to in a couple levels, and Indiana Jones can drive around these levels in the Jeep and also get out of the Jeep and explore on foot whenever he wants, and that was pretty fun. The Jeep even lets you run over enemies. Now, if they're human enemies that are Soviet soldiers, they can shoot at Indiana Jones while he's driving around, and you have to be careful that you don't get taken out by a gun as you're trying to mow them down. But the animals don't have guns, and you can run them over with the Jeep, and that's a lot of fun. And a good way to get vengeance on nasty little scorpions that may have stung and poisoned you earlier in the game. You can just run them over at some point in your Jeep, so look forward to that. You can also run over some larger animals like hyenas at one point. I think it was even required for a puzzle, actually. Archaeology. Now, visually, I want to judge this game based on the standards of the Nintendo 64, the first 3D console Nintendo really released.
Medicinal herb.
And I'll just say that compared to other Nintendo 64 games I've played, this one actually looks quite nice. Aesthetically, the environments look really cool and atmospheric, and I can't really ask for much more than that. A lot of the textures and colors chosen, while limited by what the N64 can do, did a great job of enhancing the mood and feeling of some mysterious places, and I felt as transported as I could be by the Nintendo 64 to the exotic locations you visit in this game. Be prepared for some frame rate drops and some primitive textures and polygons. Also, a lot of the animations in the game are pretty minimal and choppy, but it's an N64 game. And for audio, let me break up audio into its components here. So the music is pretty minimal, and really you only hear a little music on rare occasion when Indiana Jones walks into some interesting chamber that he just discovered that has some marvelous sight to behold, and you'll hear an orchestral clip of music to heighten the mood of that discovery. or when he's whipping across some chasm or gap. You'll hear the Indiana Jones theme real briefly to give you just a little moment of triumph. But the vast majority of the time you play this game, you won't hear any music. It'll just be silent other than the noises you hear in the environment, like Indiana Jones's footsteps or the sound of water nearby. And it was kind of relaxing and neat, actually, to have things be sort of quiet. It made the game a little more introspective and reflective as you're exploring its environments. Sound effects are nothing in particular to write home about, and some of them are even a little grating on the ears. It felt like some of the gunshot noises were just very loud. They possibly could have been equalized better to not be so loud, but it's gunshot noise, so I guess it's supposed to be ear-piercing. Probably the nicest thing I can say about the audio of this game is in regards to the voice acting.
I'm searching for Marduk, a creature the Babylonians worshipped as a god, but he doesn't live in heaven, just on another plane.
What kind of plane, sir? Soviet or American?
Not airplane, you idiot. It's another dimension of reality.
It's amusing,
What
entertaining
have we here?
voice acting
An assault
that
rifle.
fits an N64 game, and you even hear some clips of voices in Russian when the Soviet soldiers are nearby, and that was pretty cool to hear. I liked that.
Какая прекрасная кожаная жакетка!
It's not the highest quality voice clips in terms of audio quality, but it works. It works for a game like this. There are so many interesting levels in this game with layouts that really mix up the traversal and make the levels feel larger than they are. There's no map. You don't use any map at all at any point as you work your way through these levels, and it works because they aren't quite so open-ended and maze-like that you will be getting lost. There aren't any places where you'll find yourself in just an annoying maze where every room looks the same and every hallway can't be distinguished from one another. The levels are very well developed to have unique little pockets for you to discover that are interesting and refreshing in contrast to the other parts of the level. So I really just have to praise the level design a lot. Not only will you be climbing up and down a lot of ladders and jumping across gaps, but you'll even spend some time swimming, quite a lot of time swimming in a few levels, and you'll find really cool underwater tunnels that lead to other parts of levels. It's really quite well done for this being such an early attempt at a 3D game. Now, getting back to the technical problems of this game, I unfortunately have to report that the very worst level glitch I encountered came in the final level of the game, and for a few hours prevented me from beating that final level. An elevator within the level stopped working, and the only way to get down to where I was supposed to be involved dropping down the elevator shaft and dying. So I was trapped, and I had to restart this level and play from the start of it in order to make the elevator mechanism appear and function again. Some glitch just made it stop when it wasn't supposed to. Basically, what caused it was saving and reloading a single time, or even dying a single time. So once I was able to beat the final level without dying, without stopping or saving or loading the game up, then I was able to get through it, and the glitch did not persist. That's pretty damning, and it really makes me both love and hate this game in a way, and it makes me hesitate to recommend this to everybody, or anybody. You really have to have an interest in Indiana Jones or old 3D games, or both. And then it might be worth experiencing, I feel. You really have to work with this game's glitchiness, and it's not ideal. In another level earlier in the game, as I was solving a puzzle moving blocks around, the game arbitrarily moved the blocks back, and then I had to go undo other steps of the puzzle to put them back It does things like this on occasion. Not in every level, but maybe 1 out of 5 levels. It's a little frustrating. A lot frustrating, actually. To summarize a bit, this is a really ambitious early 3D game that does some incredibly impressive things with its puzzle and level design. It's quite hampered by technical problems that will occasionally cause the game to freeze, however. In my opinion, this is an impressive game that just lacks the polish it needs to be fully playable. And that's really frustrating after seeing how many cool things are in this game. But I still wanted to play it, and I wanted to report what it was like for other people who might be interested in digging up this particular Indiana Jones video game artifact. Give it a shot if you're patient and willing to overlook some problems on the technical side.
Hey, a tiki statue with stubby little arms.